Men are in a box.
Yeah.
Men's options are so much narrower than women's. I can work full-time, I can work part-time, I can stay full-time with my kids, and society is fine with all of that. Society is really only fine with men being breadwinners. That has to change too. If women are going to have more power outside of the home, something has to change inside of the home that allows men to have a bit more flexibility.
So joining us now on Open Book is Katty Kay. She's the best-selling author, and she's a U.S. special correspondent for BBC News. And Katty, the book is awesome. The title of the book is The Power Code: More Joy, Less Ego, Maximum Impact for Women, but obviously maximum impact for everybody. I got so much out of your book. And, when we make decisions that are ego-based, as you reference in the book, get ourselves in trouble. Okay, one of my ego-based decisions was to work for Donald Trump, frankly. I wanted to work in the White House. I had, and even though my wife probably hated Trump more than Melania hates him and told me don't do it, I had to do it because, ego. So Let's start there. You have Claire Shipman is also your co-author. I think everybody should read this book. Okay, you say men see it as a zero-sum game in the book, which I totally agree with. Women do not see it as a zero-sum game. It's a big thesis of this book. So explain that to us if you don't mind. And welcome to Open Book.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on, Anthony, and for reading the book and for your kind words about it. Look, we looked around the world and we thought, hey, if everything was going so well, perhaps we wouldn't need to write a book about power. But I don't know, everything I've seen over the last few years in this country and in other countries made me think that things are not going so well, and perhaps we should start looking at what's happening at the top. And why are there, after all of this billions of dollars that have been spent on diversity programs and all of the efforts that have been made, only 10% of CEOs are women, less than 10% of the world's leaders are women. And, there's so much evidence that if there were more women in positions of power, then things would perhaps be run a little bit better. And we got into looking at this thing of what is power? How do you define it? And it came as a surprise to us that women and men don't see power the same. That men do have this idea of having power over things, right? The traditional idea of power that's come down to us through centuries, from Machiavelli onwards and before him as well, is that you have power. I have power over this cup because I can make it move. I have power over resources, or I have power over people. And the implication is you're making them do something that they don't want to do. It's kind of controlling, it's domineering, it's hierarchical. But according to academics who we interviewed for the book, women understand power differently. They're much more focused on the result, power to do something. What's the impact you can have with power? What's the why of power? What's the point of having power? And that distinction, I think, explains partly why there are fewer women in positions of power, because we've got this kind of clash of sensibilities, but also what we could achieve. I mean, it's like you do take the ego out of it. When you focus on the result of power, it's not about the big corner office or about your office in the Oval Office, right? Within spitting distance of Donald Trump. It's about, what can I do to make my company better? What can I do to improve the lives of my team? What can I do to make my community better or my country better? It's what can I do with power that's important.
So again, I think it's a book for everybody, not just women, because I think when I am in a collaboration mode, when I'm thinking about we and not me versus them, like I know right away when I'm talking to somebody says to me, oh, that person works for me, I know we're going to get into trouble, right? Because at Skybridge, people work with me. Right. Even though I run the company, they don't work for me. See the distinction? Yeah. But guys get crazy with that sort of stuff. And Margaret Thatcher said in Downing Street years, she wrote in the first volume of her memoirs, that men were more vain than women. She, contrary to what you would think from the stereotype, she found that the members of parliament she interacted with, they were more vain. So not only were they more egocentric, they were more vain. Do you believe that? You think men are more vain than women?
Yeah, I mean, that's so interesting. I mean, because that is about ego, isn't it? I mean, in a way, vanity is ego. It's like, how does the world perceive me? Do I have enough of the trappings that make me look, powerful? Do I have the big office, or, the big paycheck, or, the team? Do I have a big team under me? And one of the things that got us into writing this book about power was a study that came out of Harvard a couple of years ago that showed that women don't want power. Right? However you define it, women just don't want it. We look at it and we think the cost of getting it is too high. we have to give up too many other things that we want to do in order to get power, but also that power itself is kind of unappealing. And I think that's that vanity element that you're talking about. Is like, why would I give up time with my community, with my family, with my elderly parents, with my friends, to go for, the time I spend on exercise, all of those life values that women have more of than men, according to our research. Why would I give them up to do this, to get this thing that actually, when I get there, it's a lot of mansplaining and egocentricity, and I just don't think I'm going to be able to have much impact with us. And that disturbed us, because if women don't want power, but we think the world would be better off when they have power, when women have power, we have to think about power. It's not really about changing women, it's about changing power.
My grandmother had a great line about all this. She believed that men, for whatever reason, see themselves as immortal, and even though they're not, you know what I mean. You may remember the movie Moonstruck. Olympia Dukakis said, "Well, why the hell is Dad having a share?" Said, "Why is Dad having that affair?" Well, he thinks the young girl is going to make him live forever. You see what I mean? So there's an egocentrism to the whole thing, which I thought was brilliant. We interviewed Robert Greene, who wrote the best-selling book, 48 Laws of Power. It's coming up on its 25th anniversary, and so he's a friend of mine. I brought him on Open Book, and he said something to me. I want to test it on you. I want to get your reaction. He said that, we front ourselves is that we're not like everybody else. We're better. We're better. We have the better angels of human nature, are inspirited in ourselves. It's the other people that are weak and have warped values and so on and so forth. And we present ourselves to the world as being better. But the truth is we're not. We're all roughly the same. We have good and bad in us. And there's this, what Hermann Hesse called it in the book Damien, was the abraxas. There's good and bad in all of us. We try to pretend that there isn't. Do you believe that, Katy? Do you believe what Robert Greene said?
Yeah, I think that's kind of right. I also think we're all sort of average, right? I mean, the idea that I think we go around with this idea that I'm a superstar, I'm better than other people, whether it's morally or professionally. And then actually that gets us into trouble, because we hold ourselves to this standard of having to be constantly the best.
Yes.
And just by the law of averages, right, Anthony? I mean, we cannot all be the best. I mean, it's just, math doesn't work like that. Most of us are just kind of average, and we're kind of muddling through. And I think in a way, particularly, for women who tend to be more perfectionist by nature, according to our research, than men, in a way, recognizing that can almost be sort of liberating. Because if we recognize that we have good and bad in us, it's going to make us more forgiving of other people, and realizing that those weaknesses they have, we have too, right? It's not just you who might have screwed up. I've screwed up as well. Everybody I know has screwed up. But in a way, I think that's sort of liberating. And I think it helps us see people more holistically. One of the things we talked about with power is some of the female leaders we spoke to. One of them had this great idea about you bring your whole self to work, right? People don't leave home in the morning and pop into a phone booth and put on a Superman cape and turn up at the office, even at your office. The person who turns up at your office in the morning, Anthony, is the same person that got out of bed in the morning with all of their foibles and weaknesses and insecurities and problems in their life, whether they are financial or whatever it is, personal. And in a way, if you can accept that and embrace that as a leader, I think it can make your organization work better and have more impact.
I know, it's very well said, and it's all packed into this book. A couple of things I want to go over, because you're mentioning these women. You interviewed Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern.
No, we didn't. We referenced her, but we wanted to interview her, but she was right in the middle of.
I'm sorry. Was it one of them? Who did you interview? You interviewed one of these women.
We interviewed a lot of women. We interviewed the first female.
It was a recent one. I remember reading in the book there was a recent leader that you interviewed that I was very impressed with. We interviewed
a woman actually in Senegal who's a leader there. I don't know if that's who you're thinking of.
That's who it was. Tell us about her.
She's so interesting. So we wanted to test the idea of whether power too, when you put it into play out in the real world rather than just in the academic world, actually has an impact. And I was living in Senegal. I kind of took a break in the middle of the Trump campaign. You might understand why I needed to do that, actually, Anthony.
You need a mental health break. Dealing with mental illness, you need a mental health break.
You could have come and joined me. It might have been good for you. Anyway, I went out to Senegal, which is an interesting country because they instituted a law about 10 years ago that meant that any political party that ran for office had to have 50% of its candidates being women. Otherwise, you couldn't run. And suddenly, overnight, a whole load of women went into office, and I interviewed one of them. And I asked her, what does power mean to you? What is it as an idea? And she said, power is the ability to get an electric light into a maternity clinic in a rural area so that the midwife can help a woman give birth with a little bit of electricity.
Very interesting.
Power is getting toilets for girls into schools so they can still go to school when they're having their periods rather than having to stay home. And I just thought, this idea of power as a tool, take out the ego. That is power to change lives. It's an electric light bulb. It's separate toilets for girls. It's about making people's lives better. And I just thought that for me, that was a sort of such an inspirational way of seeing power. It's a tool. It's neutral. You use it for good or for bad. It's a service.
Well, as you write in the book, it's a service-based, service-centrism, as opposed to how does this make me look?
Right.
I'm sitting in the corner office, so I am the man. Okay, and let me tell you how many people work for me. The woman's sitting there saying, okay, I got this office, big deal. What do I got to do now? What's my responsibilities? How do I bear my responsibilities? Talk a little bit about the home power dynamic, okay? About the high-earning woman, she ends up doing more housework than the unemployed man. Isn't
that crazy? Isn't that crazy, but you kind of know it's true?
Well, I know it's true. I haven't lifted a finger. I mean, my mother used to iron my boxer shorts when I was a kid, okay?
My sons
I know we're in this like woke culture now, and I'm supposed to be this like women's liberal and stuff like that. But if your mother's ironing your boxer shorts and you grew up in this Italian patriarchy, what do you want me to do? How do you want me to act?
Yeah, like my husband's dad, who was born in 1914, right, on the eve of the First World War, he wouldn't have known a play date or a lunchbox if it had hit him on the head. He wouldn't have known what a diaper was, right? He didn't have any engagement. So my husband has no role model in his life for organizing play dates, doing the housework, because his dad never did any of that.
Yeah, well,
his mom did it all. And I think that's...
I haven't met your husband, Caddy. I already like him, okay? I already like him.
Yeah, except that then he comes along and marries me and suddenly it's going to shape up. But look, so this was just wonderful, that a man in America who doesn't have a job does less housework than a woman who has a full-time job.
And let me ask you this, though, and this is a very honest question, though. Do you feel that sometimes men who have high-powered, high-earning women feel emasculated, that smashes their ego?
So true. I mean, look, it's not just that I feel it. The data is there on this. That couples where the wife earns more than the husband are more likely to get divorced than couples where the husband earns more than the wife. We found in our book this amazing research that a third of American women now earn more than their husbands.
Right.
And the number is growing every year. But in couples where the wife earns more, guess what they do? They lie about it on the US Census form. Because they want to make their marriage look like a so-called traditional marriage.
Right.
They're kind of protecting the guy's ego by saying, he actually earns more than I do. They'll go so far as to lie on a government document in order to kind of maintain this idea. But actually, you know what we concluded from that? First of all, it's crazy, obviously, and it's sad. And we interviewed a guy who quit work and his wife became the primary breadwinner. And he told us that he felt he had failed at the one thing he was meant to achieve, which was being the breadwinner in the family. And we just thought, how sad is that? I mean, actually, the conclusion of this is that men are in a box. Men's options are so much narrower than women's. I can work full-time. I can work part-time. I can stay full-time with my kids. And society is fine with all of that. Society is really only fine with men being breadwinners. Yeah. And I think that has to change too. If women are going to have more power outside of the home, something has to change inside of the home that allows men to have a bit more flexibility.
But, our brains are not that evolved. Okay, so if you really study the brain, it's not that evolved. You have the cortex and then so you're laughing because I'm right about this. The neocortex is literally the size of 6 playing cards. And that's where all the consciousness is. And so the atavism that a man has is quite primordial. He has to be the breadwinner. He's protecting the cave. He's out there hunting. The woman is gathering. people could be mad at me for saying this, but this is why we've evolved the way we've evolved. And now we're becoming more enlightened and we're making more of a transformation. And now because of our society, we're able to be more equal. But women, Caddy, didn't get the right to vote in the United States until 1/5 of the 20th century was over. Yeah. And then they got the right to vote in the United States. So I think we've made a lot of progress. Am I wrong in saying that? Or no, I know it's not perfect, and I know we haven't gotten to where we should be in terms of where a normative standard would be in a society. But have we made a lot of progress, or am I wrong in saying that?
I'm just wondering if it's the wine bottles and the whiskey bottles that are right over your shoulder that might mean your brain is not working as well as it could be.
Yeah, so you'll notice, though. And
I like that. I like that.
These are all gifts. You'll see they're not open because I actually don't drink.
Oh, a shame. I wish I was with you.
And you shouldn't trust people that don't drink, so I drink a little. You shouldn't ever trust anybody that doesn't drink.
You're Italian, for Italian origin.
I'm Italian, but the problem is I just don't like the way it makes me feel. So I don't drink. I drink. If you and I were out to dinner, I'm going to have a drink, but I'm not a teetotaler, but I'm not a big drinker. So all these things are gifts. They're like laying around in here. And I hand them out to me. I just got that actually. It's actually some kind of Swiss drink or something.
Nice.
But go to what I said. Do you think I'm right about this? That we've had some progress?
It's one, half a dozen of one.
Does your husband know how to do play dates, or is he?
Yeah. See that? I started earning
progress.
It's
progress.
It's totally progress. And so when I started earning more than my husband a kind of few years ago, and I write about it in the book, we had to have some pretty tricky conversations about. He had to help more in the house, or my travel schedule might have to take, priority because I was the one that was bringing in more money. And they weren't the easiest of conversations to have, even, in a household like mine, where he's been used to me working. And it has kind of changed the dynamic. And I remember actually, but women have to do something here too, right? We have to give up some control over this. Mm-hmm. We have to cede some of our domain here, because I remember when my kid's school started putting him as the kind of primary contact to call if there was an emergency at school. And I remember the first time I realized that was happening, feeling sort of displaced, feeling like my role as a mother and feeling kind of guilty. And then I thought, actually, this is exactly what needs to happen. I have to be able to cede some of that stuff at home in order for me to be able to carry on doing
what I love about that is what you're saying is so brutally honest, And by the way, because I follow you on Twitter, now known as X. I mean, you've had some, and I hope your mom and dad are still alive. You have some beautiful pictures of your mom and dad that you've showed.
They died actually during COVID, but that's very sweet of you.
Oh, is that right? But I do remember you sitting at a table with them, and you could see their pride in you. And I'm like, all right, this is like a cool family. So but implied in that is that there's some levels of traditionalism that even you, as a very powerful woman, you're just describing it in terms of your displacement, you have to also go through some cognitive awareness and adjustment, right?
I think so. And I think we also have to be, rather than just getting mad that men aren't picking up the vacuum cleaner enough, I think we have to have some empathy. Women have to have more empathy about this kind of narrow box that men are in. I mean, I think of my husband as a sort of sandwich generation. He came from this background where his dad didn't do any of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And he's got no role model. And yet suddenly everybody's giving him a hard time if he doesn't do 50% of the housework.
Amen.
But look at the change he's gone through, right? He does pick up our kids from school. He does help with homework. He does organize play dates. And it's easy to focus on all of the stuff that husbands and men aren't doing. We document them in the book. And it'd be great if they step up. But also think how hard it is, that his brain, sometimes I can see it working like, hold on a second, I'm not doing enough, but my dad didn't do any of this. What's my role here? I get a hard time if I'm not a full-time dad, but I also get a hard time if I'm not a full-time breadwinner, right? We have to figure that out.
Yeah, no, listen, this is why the book is so interesting. I think the book is relevant to men and women.
You were talking about brain. By the way, you're talking about brains. Did you know that we did a whole chapter on the impact of power on your brains? That
was my next question about power and neuroscience.
It's super cool.
Yeah, so tell us about that, power and neuroscience.
So you were talking about brains and cortexes earlier. What the neuroscientists have found is that people who have power, literally the behavioral activation system in their brain lights up. So power encourages us to take action. which also means that people who have power are more likely to succeed, because we succeed when we do things. People who don't have power, the behavioral activation system kind of shuts down. They're far more passive, far more reticent, less likely to take action. So if you don't have power, you're not likely to succeed, which also, by the way, is why we want the people who have power to be the right people, right? I mean, you know this from your world in politics.
Yeah.
It's all the more reason that that old phrase about power, that power tends to corrupt, and absolute
Lord Acton,
power, Lord Acton, who probably didn't have very many powerful women around to base his research on. But actually, we also found that women who have power do not get corrupted by it. Power tends to corrupt men, but not women. Women who have power are up to 80% less likely to be charged with acts.
More willing to give it up, though, too. You know, Shakespeare didn't write about the women protagonists that were fearful of giving up their power. He wrote about the men that wanted to live forever and not give up their power. But I agree with that. But let me test this on you, because I think this is also relevant. In the Federalist Papers, Hamilton was emphatic about this, and he wrote it anonymously, at least at the time, that men can't handle power. And the reason why we needed to have this diffuse system and the checks and balances, that we actually just can't handle the power, because it does what Acton says. It absolutely corrupts, and it leads to cronyism, and it leads to a split in the society. And by diffusing the power, you make the people more powerful, and you give the people more opportunity. And I think I don't know, what's your reaction to that? Because I feel we're at a point in America now where people, okay, you know, let's give up the democracy. It'll make things more efficient. And by the way, it may for 10 years. Mussolini got the trains to run on time.
Right.
And the Italians were very happy about that. But then the cronyism comes in, and the power craziness happens. And then lo and behold, you know, you have these two-tier systems that crop up, and you get really, really poor people and a few tiny rich people at the top. You know,
well, I mean, look at China right now, right? We have the Chinese economy that's doing badly. The kind of whole social media trend in China at the moment is young Chinese hashtag, they're just going to go and lie down because they feel so apathetic because there are no jobs for them. And what's happened is that Xi Jinping has consolidated power in his own hands. And when you do that, and there's sometimes a risk, I think, of presidents in the United States doing that, of surrounding themselves with yes men and never wanting to hear the bad news. And it's unsustainable as both a political and an economic system. So the economic consequences of Xi Jinping consolidating power have led, I think, to the situation that we're in at the moment, where you have lower growth in China than was projected, just because
100%.
The best decisions are not being made.
But he's also scaring everybody, because if you get on the wrong side of him, remember, that's what happens in a totalitarian regime. I'm a business leader. I think I'm making the right decision for my company, but I'm now on the wrong side of the autocrat, and I disappear, or I'm taken to a re-education camp, or I'm told, and then all of a sudden,
I'm a doctor trying to say there's COVID, there's a pandemic coming.
Yeah. So, I mean, listen, more than one cabinet member of the Donald Trump administration has sat in this room, my office, and said to me emphatically that Trump's tweeting froze them, that they were not able to work more closely together for fear if they had done something that he didn't like, he was going to send out a career-ruining tweet. I mean, there's people like me where he's tweeting about I could care less because I'm a New Yorker. But some of these sensitive bureaucrats, they get upset about it, right? And so they stopped working together. You see, and that's a thin membrane of totalitarianism. But you get the point I'm making. This is in the neuroscience, though, am I right? There's the brain is not set up, a male brain, not super set up for lots of power, right? It goes wrong for the man. No?
Well, I think this idea that we have in our research of men, there was a big study done of Fortune 500 companies showing that when men get to the top of organizations, they lose their connection and empathy for those lower down the organizations.
Right.
They stop seeing the problems in the organization as well. That's another thing that happens. So you start putting on rose-tinted glasses. Men start putting on rose-tinted glasses and start thinking that their organization is kind of perfect.
Right.
Maybe because they've got to the top, and so they think any organization that they're at the top at must be perfect.
And by the way, I'm right about everything, so I can run a sports team I can manage money. I'm right about everything. That's the other thing that
I don't want to be challenged. And I don't want to remember the people who are at the bottom who are not rising up.
I think it's another good point.
And it's interesting that it doesn't happen to women. So women rise up to the C-suite and they don't see the world around them in their corporation with rose-tinted glasses, and they do retain their connection and their empathy to those who are starting out and are at the bottom of the tree. And I think that's a kind of interesting dynamic. It's another example of this. And I think it's why there are now a dozen studies that show, global studies, the IMF, the European Union, Goldman Sachs, Columbia Universities, that companies that employ more women in senior positions make more money than their competitors.
It's interesting. I mean, it's well said. All right, so I'm at the stage in our podcast where I have 5 words. We come up with 5 words for our authors, and you could give me a sentence. You could give me a word. I'm going to say the word. I want you to think of something about the word that you think of, and they're all obviously tied to your book. So let's start with the word control. Caddy, control.
Ego.
There you go. Okay, growth.
The ability to see that you're not good at everything, but you can be.
But also the control of ego, weirdly, right? Right. Yeah, right. Exactly. Okay. Female.
Better leaders.
Yeah, it's interesting. Male.
In a box.
Power.
The ability to have an impact and to give us joy. I think that is something that women often forget because they find power kind of intimidating, but that actually there is incredible satisfaction in having an impact and making people's lives better. I mean, that Senegalese politician I interviewed, she was making lives better. And who doesn't want to do that?
So, many years ago, I had President Clinton at one of my conferences. He had just gotten back from North Korea. He had helped secure the release of, I think, a couple of Americans that were erroneously in North Korea. And I asked him on stage, I said, so have you done better things for the world as an ex-president, or did you do more for the world as a president? And he said something to me that I'll never forget. He said, Anthony, with a stroke of the pen, I had executive power where if we wanted to put malaria nets in Africa and it cost us $900 million to do that, I stroked a pen, and through USAID, we saved 3.6 million lives from malaria. The Clinton Foundation, I'd have to work for 50 years to raise $900 million. And so the point being is, if you have the power and you use it wisely, it is a force for joy and it is a force for good.
I love that story, Anthony. And I wish all, the women who look at power and think it's too hard to get there, I have to make too many compromises and I won't, I'll have to deal with kind of egos when I get there. I want them to hear that story, because we need more women at the top, and women need to realize that power can be an incredible source of satisfaction.
Well, I love the book. The title of the book is The Power Code: More Joy, Less Ego, Maximum Impact for Women and Everyone. Caddy K, thank you so much for joining me today on Open Book. I really enjoyed it.
Anthony, that was great. Thank you.
I'm always an outsider. I'm born in America. For 93 years, I've been an American, but I always feel it. I always look at the other side. What is it like to be them? How are they different from me? I'm a split personality. I'm not schizophrenic, but I always feel that when I'm someplace, I'm also over there looking at me being someplace. I have a double vision, 2 sides or 3 sides of every story. I'm always looking at the other side. I'm always wondering, if I talk to somebody and interview them, I'd like to be the first person to interview them. I want to be the first person to put the story in print. I want to be the first person to give them grounds for having an obituary. Because if I make them well known, they'll become part of history, and maybe you'll get an obituary. Otherwise, they'll die in obscurity. No obituary.
You said something about being an outsider, and so I'm an Italian American. I wasn't even born in the city. I was born on Long Island, and my father was a laborer, he was a union man, he was a crane operator, and I got lucky enough to go to Harvard and other places and built a business here in the city. But I've always been an outsider. But your writing allows us outsiders to be comfortable outsiders.
It's just really
listen to what I'm saying, sir. It's very important for me to say this to you. You make us comfortable in our own skin when we read your writing. You make it real for us.
I'm very grateful.
It makes us feel grounded and in touch. You're a warm guy. You're somebody that has a love.
Anthony, that's the nicest thing I've heard anyone say about me. So thank you so much.
But it's important for you to hear it because
You're telling me and I'm listening.
this is how we create our aspiration in life. We read people like you and we say, hey, we're going to grow up. We're going to do big things in the world. It's a great honor today to host our first in-person episode of Open Book. I usually do this over Zoom, Gay.
I'm glad because I don't look so good over Zoom.
Well, you're looking good in person, by the way.
Thank you so much.
It's a true honor to be with a literary New York legend. Joining us today on Open Book is Mr. Gay Talese, who I have been reading your writing for 50 years, by the way. I consider the magazine story, Frank Sinatra Has a Cold, to be the greatest magazine piece that's ever been published. You also wrote The Kingdom and the Power and Honor, thy father. Gay has spent decades chronicling the lives of everyone from mobsters, media giants, and everyday New Yorkers. And the latest book, which is here with us, is A Town Without Time, which is effectively a love story about this wonderful city that I think you've lived in for at least the last 60 years. I know you came from New Jersey. We'll talk a little bit about that. You have a meticulous writing process. You're incredibly insightful. And the best thing I can say about your writing is something that Maya Angelou once said about words. We can never remember how we hear things, or we can never remember what somebody says, but we can remember the way they make us feel. And your writing has got this very powerful impact on the way we feel, sir. So it'll be with us forever. And I'm so very grateful, very honored to have you. So let's start with you, if you don't mind. This is my first in-person interview, so big honor for me. Let's talk a little bit about you. You were raised in New Jersey. Give us a little bit of your origin story.
My father was a custom tailor who was born in Calabria, a little town called Maida in the Catanzaro region. He came at 17, he left the village and followed in the path of his famous cousin, Antonio Cristiani, who was a tailor in Paris. The Cristiani family is my mother's side. My father, Joseph Talese, followed in 1921 after the war, World War I. My father went to Paris to be an apprentice for 1 year with Antonio Cristiani, who had a shop in 4 Rue de la Paix. The older Cristiani had gone to Paris in 1911. This is more than you want to know. But my father came by Paris and went back to Philadelphia after 1 year in Paris. Philadelphia then didn't like the town, but liked the resort town called Ocean City, which is about 60 miles from Philadelphia. And I liked the fresh air of the ocean. In 2 years, he was alone at a tailor shop. He bought a tailor shop. It was a town of Christians, Protestants, no Italians around there, no black people, no Jewish people. It was really a Christian town founded by Methodist ministers. Those City, New Jersey is somewhat south of Atlantic City by about 10 or 12 miles. In 1925, he went to Brooklyn because his cousin, Nicholas Pileggi, was getting married.
And Nicholas Pileggi, of course, for my young viewers,
there's the father,
one of the great writers of all time.
But there's the father.
Yeah. Oh, the father, Nicholas Pileggi.
My father and Nicholas Pileggi Sr.
Okay.
were cousins from Calabria. They both came to America more at the same time. The Pileggi Sr. was a saxophone player in a couple of bands. He also worked in movie theaters, a silent movie to provide the. But when he got married, Nicholas Pileggi Sr., his wife to be, was the sister of my mother, because Joseph Talese, my father, met his bride to be at the wedding of Nicholas Pileggi and Sue Pileggi. That's the son, Nick Magdalene Orphan is the son of that marriage. Back to me. I was born in 1932. My Mussolini was on the rise in Italy. As the war came upon us in 1941, 42, 43, my father's 3 brothers were drafted in Mussolini's army. So for the period of World War II, from 1942, I was 10, right through the next 4 years of the war, I didn't know if I was on Italy or America's side. But the town was a very waspy town. So I never expressed anything. I was really interior, but I had a split personality. My father kept his mouth shut. He was a tailor. And his wife, my mother, Catherine, had a dress shop in the town. And most of her women that she dressed were middle-aged women, a little overweight. But her choice of clothes made. And that's very important for me because as a kid in school, I would help my mother in the dress shop. I would listen to the stories of these women during the war. These stories were fascinating. They're ordinary women, not the women who would get an obituary. They were not newsworthy women, but they were worthy in their consciousness of the history of the time, of World War II, and how it affected them. Nylon stockings, they couldn't go anywhere. There was the ocean cities on the ocean, so there's a lot of security along the beach. And I was hearing as a boy after school with her mother's dress shop and my father's tailor shop next door, the voices of people that were not necessarily national figures at all, not even newsworthy, even our town weekly. But that's where my training as a journalist began because one, being a son of shopkeepers, you learn manners, how to treat the customer. The customers are your sources, your source of income, but you would have to cultivate them. You never ask too many questions. You listen and you don't intrude. You learn to dress well. My father's a tailor. As a kid, I always had tailor-made clothes. Appearances matter. As a journalist, I always said, if you're knocking on someone's door to get interest, to get access to their story, you have to make a good first impression. Clothes matter. Journalists today dress like that, like to go to a tailgate party. But this was not true in my mentality and my training and sensibility. I worked in high school. I was not good at anything really, except I worked on the school paper. Then I worked for the Town Weekly, writing a high school column. In 1949, I graduated from high school. My grades were so bad I couldn't get into college. I tried to get to Penn State, Rutgers, zero. Well, one of my father's customers was a doctor from Alabama, who was in our town in Ocean City. He said, I could get gay in Alabama. Well, we didn't know where Alabama was, but it was a college anyway. So in 1949, my father drove me to Philadelphia. My mother sent me to Alabama on an all-night train to the Southerner. And I wind up in a place called Tuscaloosa in 1949. I spent the next 4 years at the University of Alabama. I worked on the college newspaper and the stringer for the Birmingham newspaper, a Hearst newspaper, called, I forget the name. In 1953, I graduated. And one guy I met as a student was from Mississippi.
Yeah.
Named Jimmy Pinkston. And he said, Gay, you want to be a journalist? When you get out of here, when I graduated, go to New York and look my cousin up. He's a manager of the New York Times. He'll give you a job. Really? Yeah. So when I got out of Alabama, first thing I did after a week I got on a bus and I go from, let's say, to New York. Well, I get off at 43rd Street, the bus terminal. And I walk in the New York Times building. It was like 11 o'clock in the morning. I got at 8. I was wearing a suit and pocket street and hat. I go to the New York Times building, third floor newsroom, the receptionist. On the big reception room, on the walls were the photographs or paintings of the Sulzberger family, the owners of the paper. And I would go in there and say, good afternoon, young man. And I was receptionist. Oh, hello, I'm here to see Mr. Catledge. Oh, did you have an appointment? No. But I know his cousin. In Alabama, I know his cousin. Guy looked at me. This is an elderly man, but a very distinguished man. He looked at me. I knew his cousin. He was a little frightened. He was listening to pick up the phone and he calls someone in the newsroom. This was the reception room. Soon as a younger man comes out and said, good afternoon. My name is Herbert Andre. I'm Mr. Catledge's executive secretary. And did you say you want to see Mr. Catledge? I said, yes, I do. Thank you. Well, he's a very busy man. I assume so. And he has but do you have an appointment? No, I went, but I know his cousin. I was just a minute. Mr. Catledge has a meeting with his editors at 4 o'clock. If you come back, this is like 11 noon. Come back at 10 to 4. I'll try to get you in for 5 minutes, but that's all. I can't do more than that. But he sees his editors at 4. Come before. Thank you, Mr. Andre. I hadn't been to New York before. None. I wander around Times Square. Come back about 10 to 4, 4. Same minute, come in, and Mr. Andre is a voice that takes me into the city room, big city room. hundreds of typewriters, desks, men smoking, drinking, women all over the place. It was really like a movie. The whole block from 43rd Street to 44th Street, big room. And then Mr. Andre, I follow him down the aisle, and he goes to the big room, the Turner College's room, the Badagieta's room, a big office. And at the back of the office is College himself, a gray pinstripe suit, beautiful silver hair, forehead complexion, and one just polished foot on the desk, leaning back in a big chair. And I can walk in and say, good afternoon, young man, Mr. College said. Hello, Mr. College, thank you for seeing me. And sit down, young man. Thank you, Mr. College. I just graduated from the University of Alabama on a journalism degree. And I have a friend named Jimmy Pinkston, your cousin. He said I should come and see you and maybe get a job. And Kat said, people work for the New York Times, have a lot of experience. You're a college student, that's very good. But we have people who work here, work for big newspapers for a couple of years. And you said, my cousin? Who's my cousin? Oh, Jimmy Pinkston. Is my cousin? Yes, sir. No expression, no recognition at all. And I'm the secretary is behind me, and I'm saying that's here's College, and there's silence. I said, I'm sorry, Mister. I thought I was there. Here I have bad sources. I'm supposed to be a fucking journalist. Bad sources. I said, well, maybe I could get a job as a copy boy or something. And College looked at Andre and said, no, Mister, I'm sorry, there's no opening. College said, look, Mr. Andre will take your phone number. If anything opens up, we'll let you know. Thank you so much. I got up and I was taken out of the city room. They put on the bus and went back to Ocean City. Called that stupid cousin and said, what did you do that for? I go, oh, here's my cousin. Oh, he doesn't know it. 2 weeks later, in a tailor shop, my father picks up the phone rings. Mr. Talese, please. This is Mr. Father. No, younger Mr. Talese. So I get on the phone. I happen to be in the store. Andre, Mrs. Andre, we have a copy boy job open. Are you still interested? Oh, yes, sir. You say, when can you come to New York? Oh, I can come today. No, you don't have to come today. Come 2 weeks from now. That's how I started. I went back to New York and got a job as a copy boy. That was in 1953. Copy boy job is a menial task. I went to get sandwiches for people and run. But New York was this great city, and I had not seen it. So everything I saw was a sense of wonderment, a sense of aspiration, the grandeur and
multi-ethnic, right? Melting pot.
So one time I saw on 42nd Street, that three-sided building where they dropped the ball during New Year's Eve.
Yep.
Back in 1903, that was the New York Times building. Before the paper got too big, and they moved a block away to 229 West 43rd Street. But I happened to notice that building. It had a sign to people that are not my age, but there used to be a headline sign and a big 7-foot letters were rotating around the three-sided building.
The zipper.
The zipper. I don't know. No one knows that, but this big deal in those days. 1928, it started with announcing the election of Al Smith over Jimmy. Al Smith lost to Hoover, 28. Mm-hmm. The Lindbergh baby is a big feature. The scoops of that. I wandered into that building one day, and I saw the steps. Nobody was there. I walked the steps to the fourth floor. I walked in. I saw a man on a ladder. The man on the ladder looked like an accordion. And he was pushing buttons, and that once was causing the outside the building, the lights to form letters. I watched him. Well, who was this guy? When he came down from the ladder, he said, "Excuse me, Mister, I'm a copy boy, but I'm wondering what you're doing. Explain it all." I said, "This might be a story." He gave me his name and gave me his facts on how it worked. I went back and during my off hours as a copy boy, I started writing on somebody's borrowed typewriter. I wrote the story. I showed it to we had a star reporter that day named Meyer Berger. Meyer Berger was a big name on the staff. Mr. Berger, would you look at this? He's looking, that's still pretty good. How'd you get? I talked to the guy. Berger gave it to the city and they published the damn thing in the editorial page. They didn't have a byline. In those days, you didn't have bylines in the editorial page. My first thing. So after that, my free time, I just kept looking at the city and finding, I read a column by Walter Winchell, one of the tabloids. And the column said, Broadway next year, this is 54. is going to feature Carol Channing in a big musical called The Vamp. It is inspired by a silent movie screen actress named Nita Naldi, who played opposite Valentino in many silent screen features in the 1920s and the 30s. And she lives in obscurity in a hotel off Broadway. Nita Naldi lives off Broadway as obscurity. I said, Jesus, that's a story. That's a story. She inspired this Broadway play. But she didn't tell you the name of the hotel. But in the copy boy, they had the hotel, and we had a black telephone book in the back of the city room, all the yellow pages, all hotels, from A to Z. So I started calling every hotel right down from A to Z. Is Miss Dolly there? Is Miss Dolly there? No, she's, no. Nobody knows she was. I finally got to Wentworth Hotel. Is Miss Dolly there? She's out. Then she's taking a walk. When must she be home? I don't know. Thank you so much. Hung up. I go right to the Hotel Wentworth. I don't go to the desk. I don't want them, I don't want to have questions answered. I go to the house phone in the corner. Miss Dolly picks up the phone. I called. Is Miss Dolly there that picked up the phone? Hello, and this is I'm a copy boy of the New York Times, Miss Dolly, but I read. I hope I can write a story about you. I read in the column the other day that you inspired the play that Carol Channing is starring in on Broadway called The Vamp. I actually played that part, not Carol Channing. I said, well, I just maybe I can write about it. Can I interview? Where are you? I'm in the lobby. Well, this place is a mess. Well, give me 5 minutes to fix it. So I wait 5 minutes. I go up the elevator. I don't wait in the lobby. I don't want to be answered. What are you doing here? I go up to the 5th floor, wait in the hall for 10 minutes. Then I knock on the door. This tall woman with black hair and black dress, dangling earrings, looked like a silent screen movie actress for sure.
It's like Sunset Boulevard, the whole story.
That's right. The parrots were hanging from the ceiling. The decor was always in the 1920s. It looked like a movie set. Come in, young man, sit down. Oh, you say you want to write a story about me? Yes, I do, Miss Naldi, because I think you have a fascinating story. She starts telling me her story. She sits me down. Next 2 hours, she talks about her story. I was making notes, make notes on little cardboards. There's a shirt board, your name there. I write these things. I don't want to, there's no recording in those days. So I did. And I wrote, took notes, and I went back to my house. I lived in McDougal Street then. And I started a story. And I wrote a story, and I went back after I finished it, I went back to the paper, and I gave it to the receptionist of the Sunday department, the magazine. And she says, can you give it to the drama editor? They did, and I got a call a couple of days later that they liked the story, and they're going to yips it. They wanted to see me and check the facts. I was a copy boy writing this stuff. So I did very well as a copy boy, and I was later on, I had in the Army for a couple of years. I was the lieutenant in the tank corps in Fort Knox, Kentucky. Then I got to work under the general there, Creighton Abrams. There's a tank called the Abrams tank. Creighton W. Abrams was the guy that inspired the tank. And I would work for him after a year in the tank corps. And when I later went to Germany with him, to Frankfurt, Germany, 3rd Armored Division, which later on had Elvis Presley as a private in that 3rd Armored Division. And a good soldier, I'm told. And then I came back to the Times in 1956, and they gave me a job in the sports department. I was the only reporter. Then I worked there for a year, and then I did a lot of stories. I worked at General News, and that's essentially it. Then I quit in 65. I loved the paper, but 65, I was 32 years old, and I had a 1-year-old daughter. And I felt I had to. I didn't want to go old. I don't want to be an old journalist. I saw old journalists. And it's a young man's game. And I was okay at 32, but this is it. So I knew an editor at Esquire. I had written a lot of pieces for Esquire. One on Joe Louis, one on the director named Joshua Logan, a famous Broadway director, and others. And they gave me a contract at Esquire in 1965 for 1 year. I did the same amount of money I made at the Times, but I only had to do 6 pieces and long. I could write 10,000 words. Times Magazine, 2,500 is tops. 10,000 words, I could take a month or two to do it. So I learned, and then they want me to do I said, I want to write about some people in the New York Times. Well, yeah, but I want you to, the editors said, I want you to do Sinatra. I don't want to do Sinatra. Everybody's done Sinatra, and I don't want to do them. Well, listen, you want to write about the New York Times people? You have to help me with the newsstand sales, the editor Harold Hayes said. And it's easy. We're all set up. I check with the press agent, not just press agent, Jim Mahoney. It's also, go out there and stay in the Beverly Wilshire. Take it maybe a week. So, and then you come back, and then you can write about the Times managing editor, Clifton Daniel, which I wanted to do. He replaced College, that guy. So I went out there, they gave me a first class ticket. TWA. On that damn airplane, I read it in another news column that Sinatra was going to sue Walter Cronkite and CBS because there was a CBS interview that Don Hewitt had set up an interview with Sinatra's people, but then with Walter Cronkite flying out to Palm Springs, where Sinatra was living, they're going to do it. But then the Hewitt wanted to know about the mafia. And now, even though Cronkite was not supposed to talk about the mafia, Hewitt encouraged that asked him about those guys in organized crime. Sinatra was really betrayed him. He quit the interview. I mean, he stopped the interview. That was in the paper, going to be lost. I said, Jesus, I'm not going to be greeted very well as a reporter. So I went out to California. Unfortunately, I had a couple of friends that owned a nightclub or a supper club called the Daisy, and Jack Hansen and Sally Hansen. There was also, she was a designer of clothes called Jack's, J-A-X. In the 1960s, Jack's pants for women were a tremendously successful item.
Sure.
And they invited me to have dinner with them at their club. That night I saw Sinatra at the bar. I didn't talk to him yet, but I just saw him. There were two blondes. And I asked Sally Hansen, who are those blondes? And they didn't know. Then Sinatra got up, walked to the pool room. I followed him. 50, 60, 70 people in that room playing pool. And Sinatra sat in a chair with a drink in hand and looked at the guy playing pool. His name was Harlan Ellison, I later found out. And Sinatra got mad. What kind of boots you're wearing, young man? The Italian boots? No. Spanish boots? No. What are they? Why are you talking to me this time? I don't like the way you're dressed. I dress to suit myself. Well, I don't like the way you're dressed. I just put on it. I'm watching, and I'm thinking, Jesus, this is crazy. I mean, that was a scene. I don't want to go on and tell you the whole story because you read the story. But those two scenes, sit out at the bar, the blondes, that's not the poor, were the opening scenes of that article, which is how I really work. I don't want to interview question, answer.
No, you're ethereal. You pull the character into the story. You feel, when I read that for the first time, I was in high school. And
really?
Yeah, I'll tell you what happened. Esquire had a anniversary special. I think you wrote that article. It had to be 1965, I believe, thereabout. And it was the 15th anniversary of the article.
Oh.
And so they republished it in 1980 in Esquire. And I read the article because I think I mentioned this to you before we started the interview. My uncle knew Sinatra, and we used to go down to Vincent's Clam Bar in Little Italy, and Ferraras, that whole area. And one night I went down there with them, and Sinatra was there. Wasn't with him, but he was eating with somebody else. We went over to the table to say hello, and he couldn't have been nice. He was very charming. So when I saw his name in the article, I read the article, and the article made me laugh because you captured the essence of who he was. There was a charming nature to him. There was also a little bit of a volatile nature to him. And of course, James Kaplan, who I think wrote a 2-volume biography of Sinatra. And he tried to also capture the essence of what you wrote in that story about Sinatra.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if he read it. Nice that you read it, but I don't know if Sinatra read it. And even though
you ever read it? You don't think he ever read that story? It's the most famous story ever written about.
Well, he never told me, but I never got a letter. But I didn't get a lawsuit either, just as well. But I didn't want to write it, and I don't know. I think I know why. I didn't want to write anything to offend him because I loved him. Because I have to back up a minute. I told you my father's from Italy, and told you my father, in World War II, my father's brothers are fighting in the Italian army. I'm in a waspy little town in Ocean City. The war, Mussolini, Dago Wop, I was called everything by the people. I went to parochial school, a little church school. A couple Irish people that hated me. And I felt an outsider. I felt I'm Italian, I'm a Dago, I'm Mussolini, and all that stuff. But at the same time, Anthony, Sinatra's on the radio singing Lucky Strike cigarettes, here's the parade. And also the girls in my high school class and the women who bought dresses for my mother all liked Sinatra. I didn't know anything about whether they liked me or not, but I know that the people, even though I felt marked as an alien, as a minority member, as an interloper in a way, Sinatra was accepted. He was the first Italian-American accepted, assimilated in the mainstream.
Well, he made it easier for DiMaggio. He made
it easier for me.
Made it easier for me. He made it.
DiMaggio didn't did anything. DiMaggio was a great, DiMaggio was not a social activist. That was for DiMaggio. He didn't even take his teammates to dinner. He didn't even have dinner with his teammates, to Tommy Henry. He didn't bother with them. But Sinatra reached out.
Yeah, Billie Holiday, remember?
They shot at yes, and he was anti-Semitism, racism.
Louis Armstrong.
So I felt when I was a kid listening to the radio on Saturday night, Sinatra singing, when I was 12 and 13, 14. Sinatra was really the guy that made me feel American. But I don't want to write about it, but it's too much a part of me to write about. I felt uncomfortable.
Well, you wrote a beautiful story about it. I don't know if you remember.
Maybe I was right. Maybe I was right to write that story. Maybe I didn't want to do it, but maybe I was born to do it.
Yeah,
it could be.
Well, here we're still talking about it 60 years later. We're still talking about it. You may remember this in the 40s. Sinatra did a movie. It was a 15-minute movie about racism and accepting each other.
That's right. I saw that.
And it was a beautiful movie, and he was trying to make the point that we're all here now as Americans. It doesn't matter what our color is, our ethnic background. We have to learn to love each other.
It's true.
And it was a breakthrough movie in that time.
It's true.
Of course, Sinatra very famously, he told the band that Nat King Cole had to stay in a hotel with him.
That's right.
And it didn't matter that they weren't letting blacks into the hotel. Nat King Cole was staying in a hotel with him, and he forced the situation.
Incredible, great man.
And Quincy Jones used to tell me that story. Of course, Quincy's now passed as well. But I'm sitting in a very beautiful house here in the middle of New York, in one of the nicest areas in New York. And you got to this house, and I think you bought this house in 1958. Do I have that right?
Well, I started
pieces of the house.
I lived in this house as a first as a renter. This is an 1871 brownstone. This area was developed when Central Park was built in 1860s. In 1860, when the park went there, the whole of the Upper East, the Upper East Side came as a result of Central Park's opening and being. In 1957. I rented a one-room apartment in this building. And then in 1958, I started dating a girl who worked for Random House named Nana Hearn. And in 1959, I had an assignment for the Times to go to write about the Via Veneto for the New York Times Magazine. That was the summer when Fellini's making La Dolce Vita. And Anoka May, Marcello Mastroianni, all the stars of that show. Mm-hmm. And I'm over there writing this article, and I met a famous writer I knew named Irwin Shaw. No one knows him. He was a wonderful
Rich man, poor man.
Yes. And I know him. He said, "What do you do?" And I also have a girlfriend. She wants to come over, but she wants to get married. I don't. Have her come over, and I'll give you a party. Irwin Shaw will give me a party. Yeah. So I called Nan at Random House and said, "Hey, Irwin Shaw over here. We want to come over. Come over." My wife says, "I'm going to get your birth certificate. I want to get married. I'm not coming over." I was like, "Come over." So we came over, and he got us married. Irwin Shaw. I have a picture of us up there, right of him. Irwin Shaw over there with Campidoglio. We were both fallen Catholics. My wife went to Manhattanville, was a Sacred Heart Convent school in Purchase, New York. When she met me, her religion was over because I was a fallen Catholic and I didn't want to. I was committing too many sins to sexual sins.
You can always confess your sexual sins, gays, no problem.
No, I didn't. We got married, and Erwin Shaw was wonderful. He gave us a big party. Came back here, and I got a second apartment and third apartment. In 1971, I met a gangster. Another gangster, Bill Bonanno. I met him when I was a reporter in the New York Times, and I want to write about him, but I couldn't talk to me. All military, crazy. But what idea to write about. But in 1971, he was about to go to jail to Terminal Island in California. And he said, this is the time to talk. So I went to, he had 6 months left. I spent 6 months with him. And I got to meet Chopin, his father, and all the gangsters. So I wrote a story called Honor Thy Father. Became a bestseller. I had money. 71, I had money. And this house was up for sale. I bought it. Then that was cheap, $175,000. But everything was cheap. That's one of the wisest things I ever did. I had 2 daughters that live here. They're still in New York. And my wife doesn't walk very well, but she and I have been married since 66 years, 67 years.
God bless you, sir.
And I'm 93 and she's 92.
I want you to describe to us your writing style, and I'm going to say a few things about it because I find that you're able to capture the everyman. There's a quality about your writing style where whether it's the bartender, it's the doorman, it's the person on the street. There's a German word called Sonder, S-O-N-D-E-R, and it means that everybody has their life. Everybody has their center and their narrative around them. And sometimes we walk by them on the street, we just see them as objects in our field of vision, but not you. You are able to get into their personalities, and you're able to think with great empathy about their lives. Why is that, sir?
Well, because that's really where I dwell mentally. My mother and father had a store. I was always in a store after school. I'm a store boy. The people that came in, the customers, all had stories. They're ordinary stories, but they were the stories in fiction.
They're stories, though, yeah.
But I read fiction as a kid. I read John O'Hara, Erwin Shaw, my friend, Hemingway, Fitzgerald, John Dos Passos. There were storytellers. Mary McCarthy was a good writer. Mm-hmm. I liked. Storytellers, and that's people that had stories to tell in the shop, the dress shop or the tailor shop, or characters. Arthur Miller wrote about a failed salesman named Willie Loman, an international figure, but he's a full-fledged flop of a nobody. Was a nobody. I wonder about nobodies making somebody. Those nobodies, I thought, the customers were nobodies in the sense of news, but there was somebody in the sense of storytelling. And I, as a kid, wanted to tell their stories. When I became a journalist and had an outlet, I wrote about ordinary people, doormen, the woman who worked in the subway, maybe people who sweep the streets.
They're beautiful. They're beautiful stories. But what they make you feel about your own life is your humanity. They make you feel about your own life, all of that vulnerability and all that substance. Do you remember how we met?
Where I see you, it's always crowds.
Yeah.
I don't ever see you one-on-one. This is the first time.
It's the first time. But I met you. You came to a Bocconi event, and we were at the Racket Club. And you came in, you were impeccably dressed. And I was there with the woman that's now on the Daily Beast, Joanne. Do you know who I'm talking about? Joanna Coles. And I was making a presentation about the American political system. And you were impeccably dressed. You came up to me. You shook my hand. I said, sir, I'm a huge fan of yours. I've read so much of your work. Would it be okay if I get your email? That's how we met.
I'm glad you did.
But you leave a very big impression on people. You need to know about your life that all of us, the way you talked about Sinatra, we talk about you.
That's what
You made it easier for all of us. And so I'm very grateful to you for sharing your day. Before I let you go, if you don't mind, sir, I want you to tell me at least a paragraph, possibly more, about New York and your love affair with New York and some of the things you wrote in The Town Without Time.
Well, it is an international city. If you go into a subway, and I'm often in a subway, you can eavesdrop and hear 3 or 4 languages in one subway car. Being the son of an immigrant, and my mother, while she was born in Brooklyn, she was an immigrant from the same village as my father, Nick Pileggi. So I'm always an outsider. I'm born in America. For 93 years, I've been an American, but I always feel it. I always feel I'm a little bit Puerto Rican. I'm a little bit I got kicked out of America. That's California. I always look at the other side. What is it like to be them? How are they different from me? I'm a split personality. I'm not schizophrenic, but I always feel that when I'm someplace, I'm also over there looking at me being someplace. I have a double vision. It's 2 sides or 3 sides every story. I'm always looking at the other side. I'm always wondering, if I talk to somebody and interview them, I like to be the first person to interview them. I want to be the first person to put their story in print. I want to be the first person to give them grounds for having an obituary. Because if I make them well known, they'll become part of history, and maybe you'll get an obituary. Otherwise, they'll die in obscurity with no obituary. Obituaries is a very arbitrary thing. Who gets published and who doesn't get published on the obituary page matters much to the management of the newspaper, and it's also a determination of how important you are, what kind of life you lived, how much achievements you've made. You'll get an obituary for sure. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I think so.
A lot of people aren't sure.
I just want that to be a long time from now, so I don't want that guy have it come too quickly.
And significantly, one of the persons that made famous was an obituary writer named Alden Whitman, who was in this book. He got so famous, he won the Johnny Carson show, and later wrote a book after I wrote about him in Esquire. Mr. Bad News was an obituary of the New York Times. So, obituary writers, you ought to know them.
What do you imagine is going to be in your obituary, sir? Which will be many years from now, but what do you imagine?
Might be next week. What's going to happen, no doubt, is Frank Sinatra is going to be this 3rd paragraph, or the 2nd paragraph. I've written 18 books. Onto the Sons, about my Honor Thy Father. Thy Neighbor's Wife is a very controversial book. The Kingdom of the Power you mentioned about the airtime.
Mm-hmm.
A bridge building, I wrote the whole book of the building of the Verrazano Bridge. I wrote about a voyeur. I read about a lot of stories. Sinatra's, I'm known for a magazine piece. Granted, a wonderful magazine piece, but a magazine piece. But what's better than nothing? I'm not complaining about it.
But you said something about being an outsider, and so I'm an Italian-American. I wasn't even born in the city. I was born on Long Island, and my father was a laborer. He was a union man. He was a crane operator, and I got lucky enough to go to Harvard and other places and built a business here in the city. But I've always been an outsider. But your writing allows us outsiders to be comfortable outsiders.
Which is really... Well, Sinatra did it for me, and he probably did it for all of us.
But you should listen to what I'm saying, sir. It is very important for me to say this to you. You make us comfortable in our own skin when we read your writing. So you make it. I make it real for us.
I'm very grateful.
It makes us feel grounded and in touch with the. You're a warm guy. You're somebody. You're somebody that has a love.
Anthony, that's the nicest thing I've heard anyone say about me. So thank you so much.
But it's important for you to hear it because
you're telling me, and I'm listening.
This is how we create our aspiration in life. We read people like you, and we say, "Hey, we're going to grow up. And we're going to do big things in the world." Okay. So I'm very blessed to know you, sir. I want to thank you for coming on Open Book with me today.
Thank you so much.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you.